Welcome everyone to today's webinar. Thank you so much for spending the next 60 minutes with us here with LTAP and with our special guest today. And our today's webinar is Signs of the Time, Updating the Minnesota MUTCD. But before we get started, I just want to do a couple introductions. Myself, I am Catherine Stanley. I am the LTAP Program Manager. Also on this call, I'll introduce the speaker last. Also on this call, I have Nellie Niskanen. She is a program coordinator. I know she wants to say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Also, Mike Evesloggy, if he wants to say hi.
Hey, everyone.
So Mike helps coordinate a lot of our work zone safety workshops. So part of this too, we do the work zone safety. So you'll see his name a lot when it comes to that. So they're on in case my computer goes down. We'll still have backups. So they'll be in the background. And then my camera also go off once Tiffany goes live. But we're going to reserve a lot of the questions till the end. But you can I still encourage you to put them in the chat box. It's on the lower part of your screen. It says chat. So if things you can think of along the way, go ahead and put it in there. But Tiffany might actually answer them later in the presentation. So if you just want to hold your questions till later, just in case she answers them. But otherwise, it's okay to put it in there. We'll still address them throughout. And then along with Tiffany, there's Josie. Josie's on the line too. She works with Tiffany, and she'll be entering things in the chat as well throughout the presentation. So with that, I'll introduce our presenter today. Our presenter today is Tiffany Kautz. She has more than 20 years of experience at MnDOT with a strong background in traffic engineering and standards development. For the past 6 years, she has served as a traffic standards engineer in MnDOT's Office of Traffic Engineering. In this role, Kautz has led efforts to reroute the Minnesota Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, working closely with stakeholders across the state to develop a document that is practical, relevant, and reflective of our state's needs. So if you want a copy of this presentation, just send me an email afterwards. We will not be posting it on our website, but I can send you a copy of it through email. So with that, I will hand it over to Tiffany.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that great introduction. Again, my name is Tiffany Kautz, and I work for MnDOT. And for the last over 2 years, my work life has really focused on the rewrite of the Minnesota MUTCD. So I'm really excited to share with you today the changes that we've made and the document. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we go, though, too far into this presentation, there's a couple things I want to tell you. I can't speak for FHWA. A lot of the changes that we're going to be talking about today are going to have occurred at the national level. I do have a couple of resources that I can look at if somebody has a question about why maybe something changed at the national level, but oftentimes I'm unable to find something, or the information that I do find doesn't explain it well enough. Also, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to be the MUTCD police. The goal of this presentation is to simply tell you about the changes that have occurred in the manual. There is a lot of engineering judgment that goes into interpreting what the manual means, and it can mean different things to different entities or different people. So I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not the MUTCD police. So at the end of this presentation, I hope that you'll be able to understand Minnesota's obligation to align with the national MUTCD and how that limited our ability to do a lot of state-specific modifications. Hopefully you'll be able to navigate the MUTCD and efficiently find the information that you're looking for and identify Minnesota-specific language. And finally, I'll talk about a list of changes that are new, or changes that occurred in the MN MUTCD. Basically, we're really only going to cover the tip of the MUTCD iceberg today. I also want to mention that there's a lot of new additions in the MUTCD, a lot of new signs and new maybe tools in the toolbox, but we're really not going to have time to get into those today. So why do we have the MN MUTCD? Well, first off, this is a book of standards for the use of traffic control devices, and it establishes the criteria for the use of those so that hopefully as people navigate our state or navigate through our state, they're able to, when they encounter these devices, understand what they mean and that these devices are used consistently, that they promote safety and that provide that clear uniform messaging to road users. And that's for across our state, but also for across our country. So that this also means that folks who travel from other states to our state or through our state, it's really what makes a stop sign a stop sign. A stop sign is an octagon, it's red, it has the white letter stop and a white border along it. So we want that stop sign will look the same whether it's used in the state of Minnesota, on a MnDOT roadway, or on a city street or a county street, and throughout the country. And really, because we need to be in substantial conformance with the National MUTCD so that we're not doing anything too wild and crazy here in Minnesota. And so the National MUTCD really becomes the backbone of the Minnesota MUTCD. And we need to obtain substantial conformance from our FHWA division office. And what that means is that standard statements that are found in the National MUTCD need to be found in our Minnesota State MUTCD, along with guidance statements. Those also, that if they appear in the National MUTCD, need to be included in our state MUTCD. And we really don't have a lot of wiggle room for these standard statements or guidance statements. For standard statements, we are allowed to be more strict. And the only time we can really be less strict is if we have a state statute that directly conflicts with the standard statement. For guidance statements, we have a little bit more wiggle room, but really not much. As I've talked to folks who've been through the rewrite process before and folks across the country, my understanding is that FHWA has been a lot more strict this go around than they had been in past rewrite efforts. So how would you find the MUTCD? So I like to go to my favorite search engine. I like Google. And then you would type in MN MUTCD, and then hopefully this website would be the first result in your search. This is what our website is looking like today. So a couple of things we just adopted, and I'll get into that a little bit more later, but this is now the official adopted version, the 11th edition. So just yesterday, our website was updated. So all of this information here is now the 11th edition. If you're looking for the previous edition, the 2011 version, that's going to be over here in this little bullet on the right side of the screen. So a couple of things that have changed regarding the MN MUTCD is with this rewrite, we moved closer to the National MUTCD. Our layout is going to follow more closely the National MUTCD. We have paragraph numbers. I'm really excited about those. I think that with the paragraph numbers, they match the National MUTCD, but you'll be able to give somebody a paragraph number and better understand, like, giving them the section and the paragraph number, and hopefully have better confidence that they've found the paragraph that you wanted them to find in the manual. Also, signs will no longer be embedded in the sections. Those signs are going to be in a figure, and then the figure will be referenced in the appropriate sections. For the Minnesota Temporary Traffic Control Field Manual and the Minnesota Flagging Handbook, both of those items have been removed from the manual, so they are no longer embedded in the manual. We are working currently at MnDOT to update those and should have them updated in the next 5 to 7 months. The reason why we decided to make that change is we wanted the MUTCD, the Minnesota MUTCD, to be the minimum standard for temporary traffic control work zones for providing traffic control devices in those situations. And so the field manual and the flagging handbook sometimes go above and beyond the MUTCD, and that's okay, but we wanted the MUTCD to be specifically the minimum standard. And also just know, as I've mentioned before, we're moving towards the National MUTCD. We moved a lot towards the National MUTCD with this update, so a lot of Minnesota language was removed. So a couple of changes that occurred at the national level is Part 5, which was traffic control devices for low volume roads. The information in Part 5 has been incorporated into the rest of the manual, leaving Part 5 has now been repurposed for automated vehicles. Also, there's been some organizational changes in some of our bigger chapters in the signing part. 2B, 2C, 2D, E, F, and G, those have been divided into sub-chapters. And so what that will do is it will combine or group like types of sections together to hopefully help you find information more efficiently. And just there's a lot more chapters in the National MUTCD. Over 300 pages were added to the document. So for example, in Part 4, which is for highway traffic signals, there used to be 16 chapters. Now there's 21. They almost completed the entire alphabet. Also know that as we went through this rewrite process, we noticed that there is a lot of movement within the manual. So if there's something that you were very used to looking for in a very specific section, know that it's probably moved and probably no longer in that section. We saw stuff move from different chapters. We also saw some stuff even move from different parts of the manual to another part of the manual. So for navigating the MN MUTCD, we do have blue text. If you see blue text, that's going to mean that it's Minnesota text. And we have the paragraph numbers. Our paragraph numbers are aligning with the National MUTCD. And in order to make that alignment happen, if you see a paragraph number or a table number or a figure number that ends in a tenth of a number, that means that that was a Minnesota edition. If we simply modify the paragraph, figure, or table, it will be followed, the number will be followed by a blue M. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. So here you can see that we have paragraph 02.1, and because it is a tenth of a number, this is a Minnesota paragraph that we added. Then you can also see we have paragraph 3 that has the blue M, and then you can see some blue text in the paragraph, and that is the Minnesota text that has been added. The other thing is you can also see at table 2A-1, there's a blue M as well, meaning that we did make a modification to this table. Sometimes you will see a blue M after a paragraph number or a table number, and there will be no blue text indicated. That just means simply we removed some text. Also, we have, if we've removed a full paragraph or a table or figure, you would see the table paragraph number or the figure number, and then the blue word removed after it to indicate that that has been removed. For sign designs, for sign codes that have a capital M or a capital X after the dash, those indicate that those are Minnesota designs. And those designs can be found in the MnDOT Standard Signs and Markings Manual. MnDOT is actively working on updating this document so that it is reflecting the latest and greatest from the MN MUTCD 11th edition. And just know that's where you would find those designs. Also, there are national errors. They're on the FHWA website, and they last updated it on January 24th of 2025, so almost a year ago now. And we've included those errors and updated them in our document, but they are not considered Minnesota text, so they will not be in blue text. Before we go any further, I did want to review some items with you. So for anything, all of the text in the manual will either fall into one of 4 categories. It'll either be classified as a standard, a guidance, option, or support statement. And each one of those items has a very specific meaning. So let's just take some time to review those. So a standard is a statement of required, mandatory, or specifically prohibitive practice regarding a traffic control device. In limited location-specific cases, the results of a documented engineering study might indicate a deviation from one or more requirements of a standard provision to be appropriate. Now, I will just say that that second sentence has come up as I've talked with FHWA. If, say, MnDOT wanted to do something, provide a policy that would go against a standard, they have definitely pointed to that second sentence that talks about in limited location specific cases to indicate that we can't just create a policy that would go against a standard, because when we do go against a standard, it has to be a location specific case with a documented engineering study. And for standard statements, those are going to be all labeled and they will appear with bold text. They're going to use the verb shall, and they're not going to use the words should or may. Next, we have guidance statements. We did see a minor word changing with this definition, but it is a statement of recommended practice in typical situations, with deviations allowed if engineering judgment or engineering study indicates the deviation to be appropriate. I will mention that engineering study does not need to be documented. So for guidance statements, again, those are going to be labeled and they're going to be unbold italics type font, and they're going to use the verb should. They will not use the words shall or may. Next, we have an option statement, which is a statement of practice that is a permissive condition and carries no requirement or recommendation. So sometimes an option statement can modify a standard or guidance statement. All the option statements are going to be labeled, and the text is going to appear as an unbold, unitalicized font. The verb may is typically going to be used, and the verbs shall and should are not used. Finally, we have a support, which is an informational statement that does not convey any degree of mandate, recommendation, authorization, prohibition, or enforceable condition. These are also going to be labeled, and they're going to appear to look much like an option statement, as they're going to be an unbold, unitalicized type font. But they will not use the words shall, should, or may. So again, all of the text in the manual is going to fall into one of these categories. It will either be a standard, which will use the shall verb, a guidance, which will use the should verb, an option statement, which will use the may verb, and a support statement, which will not use a should, shall, or may verb. So let's talk a little bit about what roads need to follow the MUTCD. And I've highlighted kind of what I feel like are the most appropriate or ones for us is, any street or roadway or bikeway open to public travel, and grade crossings of publicly owned roadways with railroads or light rail transit. I do want to give a little bit of a shout out here to letter B, which says streets or roads on sites that are off the public right-of-way and are open to public travel. I know at MnDOT this can sometimes come into play when we're doing like a permit review or something like that. Some examples that they give for items that might be covered by letter B are going to be shopping centers, airports, government offices, schools, universities, and those sorts of things. Now let's talk about things that don't have to follow the MUTCD. And I really want to look at letter C here. This one is not new, but it really surprised me when I came across it during the rewrite. So parking areas, including the driving aisles within those parking areas that are either publicly or privately owned, those do not need to follow the MN MUTCD. And I think this is where we can see where engineering judgment needs to come into play. So when we were looking at B, that could have been that shopping center. So where does like the ring road for the shopping center, that site road that's off the public right of way but open to public travel, start or stop, and the parking area driving aisle begin? And I think that's really a good example of where there can be some interpretation in the manual and some engineering judgment needed to determine what the difference between or where those things start and stop. I will mention that parking area does have a definition. It is a parking lot or parking garage that is separated from a roadway. Parallel, perpendicular, or angle parking spaces along a roadway are not considered a parking area. And this is also a good time to mention that in Chapter 1C, that's where you'll find all sorts of definitions. If you have a question about what maybe a certain word means, I would always encourage you to check Chapter 1C to see if there is a definition. And this one is also, so what if the MUTCD is silent? What if it doesn't say anything about it? Well, this is one where FHWA, when I've brought that discussion to them, they have pointed me to this standard from section 1B.03. Design, application and placement of traffic control devices other than those adopted in this manual shall be prohibited. They do go on to talk about, you could request a official interpretation or do an experiment, or maybe FHWA would grant an interim approval. But without one of those things, those you can't. The traffic control device, you can't. It has to be adopted in the manual, otherwise it is prohibited. So how did we get to where we are? Let's talk a little bit about the timeline that we went through for this process. So way back in December of 2023, FHWA published the National MUTCD. And then in January of 2024, it became effective. And we spent a lot of time determining what language would go into the MN MUTCD. And I want to give a shout out to all of these names, all of these people you see over here. These were the groups. We formed groups, and these people went through the MUTCD paragraph by paragraph to determine what language should be in the Minnesota MUTCD. If their name is italicized, that means that they are part of our Minnesota Committee on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, and that is the committee that makes the recommendation to the commissioner to adopt the manual. If their name is in bold, that means they led one of the groups that reviewed the language to determine what the language should be. And I do want to mention that this group oftentimes would make recommendations of changes they wanted to make, but then when those were brought forward, it was determined that it would push our manual outside of substantial conformance, so we were unable to make those changes. So we spent a lot of time determining that language, and then in September, we released the draft of the 11th edition. And then October was a big month for us, where we received substantial conformance from FHWA, and we officially published the MN MUTCD 11th edition. And then finally, just this past Sunday, we adopted the MN MUTCD 11th edition. And so why did we spend a little bit of time, why did we publish and not adopt at the same time? Well, that had to do with this standard in section 1B.03, that once we adopted, new or reconstructed devices installed shall comply with the new edition or revision. So we wanted to give some folks some time to see the MN MUTCD 11th edition before we officially adopted. It is now officially adopted, and it is the standard that should be used for new or reconstructed devices. Basically, things are going to typically be updated through attrition, except for things with a target compliance date. So I do want to be clear, except for those things with a target compliance date, it's going to be through attrition when a new or reconstructed device is installed. Let's talk about that target compliance date. We have a list of 6 things, and let's just kind of go through them quickly here. So for the first one, it has to do with weight limit signs, and this has a target compliance date of January 18th of 2029. And so for an additional weight limit sign with an advisory distance or directional legend shall be located in advance of the applicable section of highway or structure so that a vehicle can detour or turn around prior to the limit zone. So we would probably see there's more of these. This is just a select sample of what the weight limit signs are, and then they would have these additional plaques associated with them. Next has to do with the low clearance sign. So this is now called the low clearance advance sign. And the idea here is that it shall be used to warn road users of vertical clearances less than 14 feet 6 inches or vertical clearances less than 12 inches above the statutory maximum vehicle height, whichever is greater. So that also has a compliance date of January 18th of 2029. Next also applies to items with vertical clearance. So we have a new sign here, the W12-2B. And so the idea here is that in the case of an arch or other structure under which the low clearance varies greatly, 2 or more low clearance overhead signs, one of these, should be installed at the structure itself to give information as to the clearance over the low clearance portion of the roadway. Again, this has a compliance date of January 18th of 2029. Next, we have one that we've actually known about for a while. It has to do with maintaining minimum retroreflectivity. And so that there's a method designed to maintain the retroreflectivity at or above the 50 millicandelas under dry conditions for longitudinal lines for any roadway with a speed limit of 35 miles per hour or greater. We knew about this requirement prior to FHWA publishing the National MUTCD 11th edition in December of 2023. That's why the compliance date is September 6th of 2026. So it is coming up soon. Next, we have the high profile grade crossings, and this is to either install basically this sign at a place where there's low ground clearance at a railroad crossing, where vehicles might get with a that might hang up high profile grade crossing locations for vehicles that have a low ground clearance. Also, it may include providing a detour or a vehicle exclusion sign. And finally, we have the ones to talk about traffic signals at or near grade crossings. This one is a little bit further out at January 18th of 2034. And this is just to make sure that signals near grade crossings are working with the railroad crossing. So for preemption, movement prohibitions, pre-signals, and cue cutters. So for all of the rest of the things that I'm going to talk about now, these ones do not have a compliance date, and these would just be through attrition. So we're going to talk about some removals, and then we'll talk about some other things too. Let's talk about the removals. I like to call this guy the one-hit wonder because he showed up in the previous National MUTCD and Minnesota MUTCD, but he did not make the cut, and he did not show up in our current 11th edition. So this guy is no more. He's not allowed. He's not in the manual, but we do still have the bicycle symbol and the bike word pavement message that can be used. And the reason why FHWA gave for why they removed the helmeted bike man from the 11th edition of the National MUTCD, which also means it was removed from the Minnesota MUTCD 11th edition, was they wanted to see more consistency between the signs and the pavement markings for bicycle things. And this is the symbol that you would see on the signs, and it is now one of two options for the symbol you would see on the pavement. If you're looking for more information about using these symbols or these messages on the roadway, please check out 9E.01. Next is another item that showed up in the previous version of the manual and did not make the cut for the 11th edition. So this is the roundabout directional signs. They're used in the center island of a roundabout, and they are no longer allowed. And the reasons given were they confound a warning sign with a regulation and have become prone to misuse. Minnesota, MnDOT was concerned to see this change. We were disappointed to see these signs go away. So where does that leave us? We're still not allowed to use the chevron alignment signs in the center island, nor can we use a one-directional large arrow in the center island. So it really leaves us with a one-way. MnDOT, we have some concerns that with the black and white nature of the one-way, it might get lost in snow events. So what we're looking at is possibly doing some enhanced conspicuity by increasing the size and or also adding a yellow header to the top of the sign. Next, we have the removals of the right lane, left lane. This is where we had some Minnesota designs, as you can see with the X here and the X there. So these were Minnesota signs, the right lane closed and right two lanes closed. And we have to go all the way back to section 2A.04 to find out why we can't keep them. But basically in chapter 2A, it says that if there is a standard sign that does what we need it to do, we can't just go ahead and create our own word message or create a different word legend for that sign. So the National MUTCD has the W20-5 right lane closed ahead and the W20-5A 2 right lanes closed ahead. I will say that the ahead message can be switched out with a specific distance like 1,000 feet or half a mile. Typically, MnDOT uses the ahead message as we feel it gives us the most flexibility with these signs, but since these signs are doing what the right lane closed sign and right two lane closed sign does, we're not allowed to keep those Minnesota designs. So those are gone. Next, let's talk about some honorable mentions. Keep in mind, this is not a complete list. The Share the Road sign, another plaque that showed up in the previous edition of the MUTCD, did not make the cut for the 11th edition. And FHWA, there are in-road or in-street plaques that can be used. If you want to find out more about using those plaques, please see sections 2C.67 and 9C.08. So the Share the Road plaque is gone. Then we had the combination horizontal alignment with advisory speed signs. Those signs have also been removed, but we still can use the horizontal alignment with advisory speed plaque. So the combination sign has been removed. Finally, we have the lane ends merge right sign. This sign is complicated. So if you want to know more or using it, please see section 2C.47 for what to do now, but the W9-2 is no longer in the manual. So that's all I have for removals, but now let's talk about some sign designs. So the first one I wanted to talk about are the blue pentagons that are used for as a county route sign. So the first thing for the blue pentagon is that the white route number will now need to be yellow to match the national standard. But I think the bigger change here is going to be the use of the blue pentagon versus the white rectangle sign. So we worked with FHWA about the white rectangle sign. And what was required was that there is a special system of important county roads to use the blue pentagon. And that was defined in the manual now as the county state aid highway system. So for the county state aid highway system, we'll need to use the blue pentagon. For roads that are not identified as part of the county state aid highway system, you can either use the blue pentagon or the white square. But the white square, the white rectangle, can no longer be used on a county state aid system. Again, this is going to be through attrition. So it doesn't mean that anybody has to run out and change all of these signs right now, but through attrition, they would change over. Another change that's occurred is regarding memorial signs. So in the past, when we were going to memorialize a person or entity, we were allowed to place a simple message preceding or following the name of the person being memorialized. Well, the or following got removed, and so now we're only able to place that simple message preceding the name of the person or entity being memorialized. So in the past, we would have the simple message after, but that's no longer allowed, and this will be the design that MnDOT is looking to go forward with. Next, we have some honorable mentions. We have, again, this is not a complete list. We have the in-street pedestrian crossing sign, and know that the within crosswalk is going to change to in crosswalk. I do want to note that the fluorescent yellow-green is still allowed on this sign, but it will now just be in crosswalk. And then we have these two signs, which are part of our selective exclusion signs. And we wanted this sign specifically to better match its friends in the MUTCD. Those signs are starting with a no message as opposed to ending with a prohibited message. So we changed this Minnesota sign, as we can see here with the M at the end, to a no message versus ending in a prohibited message. And because this message is repeated on our freeway entrance sign, we wanted to match that. So again, we're taking away the prohibited message and starting with a no message to match the other selective exclusionary signs. And finally, we have the Minnesota MnDOT route sign, the Minnesota route sign, and we're changing the color of this from a gold to a yellow. Now, I really honestly think that only our most eagle-eyed folks on the road will notice this change, but know that the sign will now be a yellow border not a gold border. Next, let's talk about route assemblies. This was actually something that we're excited to see in the manual. So there's been in the manual the standard that says route sign assembly shall be installed on all approaches to numbered routes that intersect with other numbered routes. So in this case, we would have Highway 53, and then it intersects with a road that's named 5784, also named Cemetery Road. And in the past, this would have required a lot of route signs to need to be in place because it is a numbered route. But we see this new option that is that says route sign assemblies may be omitted for routes that are part of an agency's internal numbering system and are not intended to be used for navigational purposes by the general public. So if we were driving on Highway 53 and needed to turn on Cemetery Road or 5784, and Google, say, told us to turn on Cemetery Road and mentioned nothing of 5784, we might be able, using this new option statement, to avoid or not need to put in all of those route assemblies, which would be a great thing for us. It does need to be looked at site-specific locations, but Minnesota or MnDOT was very excited to see this new option statement. Next, I wanted to talk about the shape of signs. Here we will see some Minnesota language, and this has to do with the silhouette of the stop sign. So the stop sign is an octagon shape, and it's important for the group specifically felt it was important to make sure that that shape, that silhouette is shown. So if the octagon shape is exclusive to the stop sign and shall not be fully concealed by mounting a different shaped sign on the back of the stop sign. Oftentimes what we will see is the octagon stop sign mounted back to back with a do not enter, which is a square sign. And then that silhouette of the stop sign is completely obscured and completely concealed. And that was the group decided that should be a shall not, a standard condition, a shall not condition. Now, if the stop sign silhouette is only going to be obscured by another sign, say, for example, you mounted keep right on the back of the stop sign, you could still partially make out the stop sign silhouette. That would be a should not condition. Next, I wanted to talk about lane control signs. So these signs, in the past, there was an option to allow for them to be post-mounted on approach if the approach had 2 or fewer through lanes. There needed to be a supplemental plaque added to them in order for them to be post-mounted. Now that guidance statement that was for both the mandatory lane movement control signs, so these signs here, and these optional movement lane signs here, that guidance statement has been removed in both sections, and now these signs are only allowed to be mounted overhead. Next, let's talk about vehicle speed feedback signs. MnDOT was really excited to see information about these signs added to the manual, but then when we started to read it even closer, we were less excited. So the first thing is that if your vehicle speed feedback sign is going to be modifying or used with a posted speed limit, it needs to be a plaque mounted below. So these 2 top ones here, that's not what we should be doing. And then the next one was that if when you have that plaque, it needs to be a black legend on a yellow retroreflective background. So this one over here, not this one over here. And then the final thing was that these shall not flash. And this is something that for MnDOT, how we've typically operated these signs has been if you're going the speed limit or lower, the sign would simply display your speed. If you were going above the speed limit but lower than a maximum threshold speed, then the sign would display your speed, but your speed would have a slow flash to it. That is no longer allowed. And so these signs, so MnDOT is looking at the ways that we're going to modify our operation of these signs, but know that if you're using it in conjunction with a speed limit, you're going to need to use the plaque below it, and then it shall not flash. Next, let's talk about some stop lines at signals. I like to say stop lines are coming to a signal near you. We have the guidance statement that is not new. Stop lines should be used to indicate the point behind which vehicles are required to stop in compliance with a traffic control signal. This has appeared in the previous MUTCD. It appears in the current MUTCD. In the previous MUTCD, we had added a Minnesota option that said a stop line may be omitted on approach to a traffic control signal if a crosswalk line of at least 24 inches in width is in place for that approach. Well, we weren't allowed to keep that option statement. So in the 11th edition, the guidance statement still remains, but the option statement is no longer there. So the stop line is no longer, you can no longer omit it because you have a crosswalk marking. Next, let's talk about some crosswalk markings. So this is a new chapter. Chapter 3C is all about crosswalks. And one of the things to know is about the longitudinal bars. I've often heard these referred to as crosswalk blocks, but they have a new name, longitudinal bars. And in the past, this width here was, you could go up to 36 inches. Well, that is not the national standard. The national standard only allows this width to go up to 24 inches. And because this was a standard, we were not allowed to change it to 36. So this width is now only 24 inches. That is the max this width can be. This is one place where I will point out a new option in the MUTCD regarding the bar pair. I know that this is where MnDOT is hoping to head for our crosswalk markings. Here's another new standard that's found in Part 9 in Section 9E.13, where a shared use path crosses a roadway, crosswalk markings shall be used. I will say that this is one where I think I can go down a little bit of a rabbit hole looking at the different definitions. So again, the definitions are found in Chapter 1C, but you can find definitions for shared use path, roadway, crosswalk, and then that might lead you to more questions about what's a bikeway, what's a traveled way, and sometimes getting one's arms all around all of those different definitions and how they work can be challenging. So let's talk about some more pavement marking long line changes. So in the past, we've had this Minnesota statement about for our long lines, we use a 50-foot cycle where we would have a 10-foot line segment with a 40-foot gap, but we were no longer allowed to keep that Minnesota language. So that got removed. MnDOT is very wanted to keep our 50-foot cycle length. So how we're moving forward with this is we're going to keep our 50-foot cycle length and then use this dimensions in a similar ratio of line segment to gap as appropriate for traffic speed to modify and use a ratio that would get us to a 50-foot line segment, but keep this ratio up here, which ends up being a 12.5-foot line segment with a 37.5-foot gap. This is what they look like lined up next to each other. But again, that 10-foot line segment with 40-foot gap is no longer allowed. Next, a similar thing happened with our dotted lines. We had the Minnesota language that said one alternative is to use a dotted line consisting of a 3-foot line segment and 12-foot gap. We were not allowed to keep that Minnesota language, and we need to move to the 3-foot line segment with a 9-foot gap. Here's how those two things look as they line up next to each other. But again, the 3-foot with the 12-foot gap is no longer allowed. Next, let's talk about temporary traffic control and sign height. So paragraph 11 in the National MUTCD has been there in previous editions, but in the Minnesota MUTCD previously, we really took paragraph 11 and made it our own and really changed the meaning of it. So the previous paragraph 11 in the Minnesota MUTCD said, except as provided in the following options, signs anticipated to be in one place for more than 30 days should not be mounted on a portable support. Whenever this anticipated time period changes, the signs mounted on portable supports should be reevaluated. So we really talked about it being about the 30 days and portable supports. where when we read what the national language is, which we were needed to keep in the MN MUTCD 11th edition, it really talks about the minimum mounting height. So signs mounted on portable sign supports that do not meet the minimum mounting height provided in Part 2 should not be used for a duration of more than 3 days. The Minnesota review group wanted to add a guidance statement about signs that are in place for more than 30 days and are not located on an unpaved surface should not be mounted on portable supports. So if you have a sign that's in the grass and it's going to be there for more than 30 days, it should not be on a portable support. For paragraph 11 here, there is a whole bunch of exceptions that allow you to keep them for a duration of more than 3 days. Here's some additions that we've had with the manual. As I mentioned before, Part 5 has been repurposed. All of the information found previously in Part 5 has been incorporated into other places in the manual, opening up Part 5 to become traffic control device considerations for automated vehicles. It is a relatively short part at only 5 to 6 pages. Also for interim approvals, this is not a complete list, but these items did get added into the manual: the green colored pavement, red colored pavement, bicycle signal faces, the RRFBs, bicycle boxes, and two-stage bicycle turn boxes. So I know previously, because we had statewide interim approvals for these, y'all were reporting them to me. Thank you so much for doing that, but you no longer need to report these to me. So here's the scoop. This is a 1,200-page document, and mistakes happen. So if you see something, please say something. Please reach out to me. If it is a mistake with the Minnesota part of the manual, I will put that on our list so we can get it addressed. If it is something that is at the national level, we will forward it on to FHWA. If you want to know more, FHWA, when they first put out the manual, did have 2 webinars that you can review. There's one for an executive summary and provides a general overview, and then there's another one that provides information for specifically for vulnerable road users. And finally, that's all I really have for you today. I do want to just mention that if you want to find our website, please, go to your favorite internet search browser, type in MN MUTCD, and that should bring you to our website. Hopefully it'll be the first thing you find. Also, I encourage everybody to subscribe to get email updates for the MN MUTCD. This is how we keep in contact with you all and share when we're updating things. Also, here is my contact information, so if you have any additional questions for me, please feel free to reach out, or if you find a mistake in our manual. But thank you so much, and I can open it up for questions now.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Feel free to put in the chat any questions you may have. Otherwise, Tiffany is always available to answer your questions. Oh, here's one that came in.
Would the weight limit okay, so I see from Michael, would the weight limit sign compliance apply to spring load restrictions or only the permanent year-round weight limit signs? So let me just go back to that slide. And so what it says is that says an additional weight limit sign with an advisory distance or directional legend shall be located in advance of the applicable section of highway or structure so that prohibited vehicles can detour or turn around prior to the limit zone. It does not specifically say that, it doesn't talk about spring load restrictions. I think that's maybe more Minnesota specific or places that have freeze thaw cycles. So it would seem to apply anytime that there is a weight limit. But again, that is just my opinion. You might interpret that standard differently than I do.
The next question is, with the signage and roundabouts, the arrows, do they need to be removable ASAP, or if they get knocked down, do you just don't reinstall?
So that's a great question. So this has to do with, let me see if I can find that one. So these are all through attrition. So it's not something that you need to go out and remove these signs right away, but it would be through attrition. So when a new sign or when a new traffic control device is, a new or reconstructed device is installed. And I think that this is also where you can have some engineering judgment about what does new or reconstructed device mean, because I think it can mean different things to different folks, depending on the situation. What size do the new driver feedback signs need to be? Oh my. Let me see if I can find that for us. I'm going to open up the new manual. And if you want to see me like can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Good. All right, we can go and we can find it together. So I'm going to first go find out what my sign design is. And I know that it's here. So it's a W13-20AP. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to write that down so I don't forget it. 13-20AP. Then I'm going to go to the beginning of this chapter and find the table that discusses all of the signs and look for my W13-20, which is right here. And so it's going to say that it is 24 by 18. Let's see if I can scroll out a little bit. So it's a 24 by 18 for a conventional road single lane, a 30 by 24 for a conventional road multi-lane, a 36 by 30 for an expressway, or for a freeway, it'd be a 48 by 36. And that sign design, because it is not a Minnesota design, is going to be found in the Federal Highway Standards Highway Signs publication. And that's going to be found on the Federal Highway FHWA MUTCD website. Are there other questions? Well, thank you everybody for coming to listen today. If you have any other questions, please do feel free to reach out. Let me go back to my contact information. And my contact information is found right there.
One more question came in. At a crosswalk, what is the standard for when to use transversal lines versus longitudinal bars?
I don't have a simple answer for that, but I would encourage to look at Chapter 3C, which is going to be all about crosswalk markings. So if I open up Part 3 and go to 3C, there is going to be information in the application of crosswalk markings that might be information that you would need, and then there's the design. So basically for the transverse, they're going to consider the transverse are not considered a high visibility crosswalk marking. The longitudinal bars, which I believe is the longitudinal bars, the ladder, or the bar pair are considered high visibility, and they do talk a little bit about that in the design of crosswalk markings in 3C.03, also here in 3C.02. Is there still a temporary traffic control manual? I believe, DJ, are you talking about the field manual? There is still a field manual. It has not been yet updated to reflect the MN MUTCD 11th edition, but we are working on it and hope to have it updated in the next 5 to 7 months. Oh, that was not the right thing. Is there anything else? Well, again, thank you, everybody. I greatly appreciate being able to get this word out to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. So this was recorded and it will be living on our website. And yes, if you want a copy of the slides, please either email me or you can just even email the Minnesota LTAP email, and then we'll get you a copy of them.
All right.
And I wish everyone a great afternoon.
Yeah.
And stay warm this week.
Yes.